Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ed Wasserman, Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism. Let me start by asking you to turn off your phones. Now, turn off means when it says on, it means off. This is one of the new wrinkles in the Apple's training us to use their technology better. It's silence mode off means that the ringer is on. We don't want that. Okay, so as a dean of a communications school, this kind of mastery of advanced technology is kind of part of the job. Thank you very much. Welcome to a stellar evening. This event is sponsored by the UC Berkeley 11th Hour Food and Farming Fellowships. That is a program that Michael Pollan and Malia Wolin, the director of the program, put together in 2013. With the support of the 11th Hour Project, which is a philanthropic initiative headed by Wendy Schmidt, also a distinguished graduate of the journalism school, as is Malia Wolin. So a shout out to the 11th Hour Foundation and Sarah Bell, who is a close associate of Wendy, who's with us tonight, I hope. Sarah, are you here?
On her way.
On her way. Okay, en route. So be nice to her when you see her, because 11th Hour has been very good to us and to the Food and Farming Fellowships and to the School of Journalism. This fellowship provides funding, training, and editorial support for print and audio journalists who are reporting on stories related to food and agriculture. Nearly 70 fellows have gone through the program since 2013. Their stories have reached millions of readers and viewers through national outlets, including the New York Times Magazine, NPR, Rolling Stone, Mother Jones, 99% Invisible, and many more. Now, our host this evening will be Michael Pollan. Michael holds the Knight Chair in Science Journalism at the Graduate School of Journalism. Michael, I need hardly tell you, is one of the world's most admired and influential writers of nonfiction. For the past 30 some odd years, his books and articles helped spark a worldwide revolution in our understanding of food and its future. Most recently, his newest book, How to Change Your Mind, is helping transform the way we look at psychedelics and their use. One can only wonder what next complex and nettlesome question Michael is going to tackle. I am curious actually about death. I would like him to do a story on death, myth and reality, do a book on that. And I don't think it may not have motion picture potential, but I'll certainly read it. Michael will be playing a supporting role tonight to our guest of honor. He is the editor, co-founder, and co-owner of a newspaper that I'll bet that none of you have read and few of you have heard of, which is the Storm Lake Times. Twice a week, it serves 3,000 subscribers in northwest Iowa. And it was founded in 1990 by Art and his brother John. Art is the editor, John is a publisher. Art's wife Dolores is photographer, and son Tom is the reporter. Art's own specialty is editorial writing. Now, I have to say, just at the personal aside, I started my career in daily journalism as a reporter in a small paper in another region of the heartland, Casper, Wyoming, which I imagine has some cultural affinities with rural Iowa, and that it's far from the ocean, and there are white Republicans as far as the eye can see. I can tell you that all those things Americans tell themselves about this deep value we place on dissent and independent expression is about as truthful as the business we tell ourselves about liberty and justice for all. People in this part of the world, that part of the world, take words very seriously. They use fewer of them, and they place a great deal of weight on them. So you need to watch what you say. So for Art Cullen's tiny paper to survive, while he takes the liberty of pointing out the hypocrisy and foolishness of local officials and the destructive environmental effects of the policies they champion, all for a community of 10,000 at a time when the local press is vanishing, is an accomplishment worthy of national recognition, which is what the Pulitzer board thought. Now, every year, the Pulitzer overseers meet to decide on the awards. They take a few minutes out from their usual practice, which is awarding Pulitzer Prizes to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and nowadays the New Yorker magazine, and they take a moment to recognize quality publications of little renown. Usually it's in the outback, they're in the outback, and often the awards come as a backhanded recognition of the fact that a particular community was devastated by a hurricane, earthquake, volcanic eruption, fire, or flood. But sometimes the award is given for clarity and courage of the journalism, as it was in 2017 for the Storm Lake Times when Art Cullen received the Pulitzer in editorial writing. I encourage you to check out Art's work. It's archived in the Pulitzer website. When I read it, what I found wasn't just a collection of well-reported, closely argued essays. I was struck by something I didn't expect to see, and I don't expect to see in passionate writing, and that is kindness. No matter how thoroughly Art disapproved of what he found people had done, and how cavalierly they had ignored his inquiries, he treated them with a courtesy and compassion that I find unusual and especially praiseworthy. And maybe it's those qualities as much as the rigor of his analysis that makes his prose so truly persuasive. So it's a great honor now to turn this over to Michael Pollan and Art Cullen, who will come up, and you will have an opportunity. I believe the format will be when you're through talking, you'll open it up to questions, and we'll have a microphone. Please wait for the microphone to come to you before you speak, because we're recording all of this. So thank you very much. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you. It's very nice of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much, Ed. Thank you all for coming. This should be an interesting evening, and I think it's going to provide insight into several different things that we're all interested in, including what's going to happen on Monday night when the Iowa Caucuses take place. But I want to start with a little housekeeping, and specifically to take this opportunity, since Ed will be stepping down as dean at the end of this semester, to publicly express my gratitude to him for his leadership, his support, it was interesting, he was talking about kindness, his all-around decency and menschiness these past few years. So please join me in thanking Ed Wasserman for his service. And I also want to thank Julie Hirano, who you've seen racing around with microphones. She helped us set up this event and got out the word to you. And Malia Wallen, who directs the fellowship and was whose idea this was, actually, to bring us here together to meet Art. So Art Cullen, welcome to Berkeley.
Well, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, your first time here.
Yes, first time west of Omaha.
So we're going to start out, just to give you a little map, we're going to start out talking about journalism and some of the challenges of local journalism today. And then I want to move in and talk a little bit about agriculture and the farm vote. And then we'll move into a full-fledged discussion of politics. And I'm really eager to hear what your sense is, what's likely to happen on Monday, and your own endorsement. But we'll wait. We'll reveal that later. Okay? So by one estimate I just bumped into online, the U.S. has lost 1 in 4 newspapers in the last 15 years, most of them weeklies, and there are now 200 counties in America that have no newspaper whatsoever. They're news deserts. Buena Vista County, your county, is not one of them. It has the Storm Lake Times, as Ed was telling us. Will you talk a little bit about your path to what brought you to founding a newspaper, what was there before, and how you ended up in journalism? There are a lot of young journalists in the room.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And I went to school at the College of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was in the first post-Watergate class of reporters. We were the second largest major at St. Thomas then. Only behind, it was an all-men's school, only behind business. And I couldn't get a job at any newspaper, but my brother was able to get me hired in Algona, Iowa, which was our ancestral hometown. And so I started out working under my brother in Algona. And I worked at newspapers then in Ames and Mason City. After that, Mason City, Iowa, they're both daily newspapers. Algona was a twice-a-week newspaper. And so I kind of cut my teeth at Algona and then moved on to these dailies. John and I separated, and John went in he had left the Algona newspapers and had returned to work at Buena Vista University. We say Buena Vista in Iowa.
Pardon me.
And Madrid and Nevada. He'd gone into work in public relations, trying to take a break from newspapers at Buena Vista, and he missed the soapbox, so he went into the Storm Lake Pilot Tribune one day, the incumbent chain-owned newspaper, and asked the 22-year-old publisher if he could buy the newspaper, and the publisher told John that he didn't know enough about community journalism to run a newspaper, and John had spent 20 years in newspapers. And he got so mad he walked out the door and decided right that day he was starting a newspaper in Storm Lake, and he called me and said, "Come home, we're starting a paper." And I said, "Look, take your TIAA craft pension and hide amid the ivy vines. Nobody will ever find you, and forget about it." And then 2 months later, I was working with him in Storm Lake.
And this was in 1990?
1990, right. And so we started out as a weekly, and then we went daily for a year and lost about $120,000. And then quickly reverted to twice a week, and we've been twice a week ever since. We had a high of about 4,000 circulation, paid circulation, and now we're down to about 2,800.
And so lots of papers like yours have gone under.
Yes.
What's your business model? What has allowed you to survive, even as you may be struggling?
Eating rice. Well, for example, right now, John is collecting Social Security, so he works for free. Mm-hmm. And
you're really inspiring the journalists, the young journalists in the audience.
Well,
that's not an option until they're 62.
Right, 67, yeah, actually. And my son Tom gets paid Catholic school teacher wages, and so. Right now, community journalism is existentially challenged, and there are papers going down left and right because we've been Walmartized. We get an insert from Walmart once a quarter maybe, and they eliminated 50 businesses that used to advertise with us. We've lost the car dealers to Facebook, both the Ford and Chevy dealers. That's $100,000 in revenue gone. So we felt pretty good because our circulation is maintained, pretty well, and we're actually starting to tick up a little bit this year in paid circulation, maybe 90 copies, 90 subscriptions on a base of 2,700, and that's considered a major victory right now in journalism, in newspapering, and
so, you have a group of people that pay $70 a year.
Yeah, $70 a year for a subscription, and so there's about 2,300 subscribers, and then we sell about another 400 copies on the newsstands twice a week at $1 a pop. And so we made $2,000 this year. The year we won the Pulitzer, we lost $70,000. That's when we lost our car dealers and furniture, and that's really when Facebook and Google really cut the rug out from under us. And so we made $2,000 this year. It was a major victory. We were about ready to spend it all on champagne and hot dogs. And then we got a notice from Walmart Blue Cross Blue Shield that our insurance rates are going up for the second year in a row, 24%. Before the Affordable Care Act, our rates were going up 68 and 78% a year. So it slowed down now to 24% a year. That's $42,000, so we started out the year $40,000 in the hole. That's a lot of $70 subscriptions.
Yeah, yeah.
And we frankly don't know what we're going to do. We always pull a rabbit out of our hat, but
Does
I
it
don't
pick
know.
up in a presidential campaign year? Or
No, they don't. They just buy TV ads, and they just cut out print. And, we get some ads from a certain candidate we endorsed. We wish we could have endorsed them all.
Well, you know, the New York Times tried that.
Right, right.
There's a precedent for that.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm kind of curious. You're in a very, you can tell us a little bit about the demographics of this region you're in, but your editorials are fiery and very progressive. Does that create business problems for the paper? Or do you lose advertisers over
Well,
what
we've
you're
lost
writing?
all the advertising we can lose, I
So-
think. And honestly, I kind of took the point of view, these editorials were about surface water pollution in Iowa, and we were taking on basically Monsanto, Farm Bureau, and the Koch brothers. And so that's not a very good business strategy in Iowa.
Did you pay a price for that, or
No,
it was
because
already
honestly,
paid?
we lost all our ag ads 20 years ago with consolidation. Monsanto's marketing and Pioneer are marketing directly. And by the way, when you win a Pulitzer, you can wear white socks with dark pants. But we lost all our ag advertising 20 years ago with consolidation because they're marketing directly to farmers. You know, there's half as many farmers today as there were in 1980, and so there's so few of them you can call them all on the phone, and so we lost all that business, and so we really did kind of take the attitude that you know, what the hell, what do we got to lose, and
So that gave you a certain freedom.
me and Bobby McGee, right?
That's it. But our image of, help us with the demographics of this town. Our image of Iowa is that it's very white, and I gather that's changing.
Yes.
What did your county, who did it vote for in the last election?
Well, the county voted for Trump, but Storm Lake proper voted for Hillary. Storm Lake, our elementary school is about 90% immigrant. It's a meatpacking town, so there's 3,000 families processing turkey and pork in Storm Lake.
This is for Tyson?
Tyson, yep. And average wage is about $18 an hour, non-union. And so about 70% of those of our elementary school are Latino. And our congressman is a guy by the name of Steve King.
We've heard of him.
Right. And he's a racist jerk. And Storm Lake is, is blue. It voted for Barack Obama twice. I think Obama won Buena Vista County the first time and lost it the second time. But it's an aberration when a Democrat wins Buena Vista County. Storm Lake's vote is drowned out by rigorously high turnout among older Republican voters. And so we live in the 4th Congressional District, 39 counties of northwest Iowa, very conservative American reform, that's Dutch reform, Missouri Synod Lutheran, Roman Catholic, German, Swedish, Dutch, and very conservative.
And what about the immigrant population? Are they eligible to vote? Do they vote?
There's about 2,000 Latinos out of a universe, I think, of 11,000 voters in our county that are registered to vote. I think I can't remember the number, how many there are in the district, but there's a sizable Latino population in Sioux City, which is also a meat packing center. And these immigrants have really kind of rejuvenated Storm Lake. Were it not for them, 67 of Iowa's 99 counties, 2/3 of our counties have lost population every year since 1920.
Wow.
And so we're really turning the tide, and so we've been very supportive of the immigrant population because the town wouldn't exist were it not for them.
And we automatically assume that editorials attacking big ag or agribusiness would be unpopular among Trump supporters. But is that necessarily how the politics plays out?
No, I've never heard a farmer praise the chemical company, or the seed company that just raises seed prices 20%, or told him he couldn't grow his own soybean seed. I've never heard a farmer say, "God, I love Monsanto." Have you?
No.
Yeah.
Once you talk to farmers, even the ones who use their products,
Right. They have to use their products.
They feel like they're
forced
trapped
to.
by a monopoly. And I remember reporting on farmers who were using GMO potatoes in Idaho, and they'd take me to see their big dealer farmer. The farmers are often dealers to their neighbors. And there was a Monsanto minder with me, actually, at this interview. And I said, so how do you feel about, Monsanto and this future of food? And he said, it's the future, you got to go with it, but it's one more noose around my neck.
Right.
And the woman from Monsanto turned white.
Yeah.
So no, there is a lot of resentment of agribusiness. So I want to talk a little bit about the series that you wrote and won the Pulitzer for, because it seems to me, it's going to sound a little granular at first, but it really gets at a lot of issues of agriculture in the Corn Belt and climate change and the alignment of forces in a state like Iowa. So just take us through there was one big story that basically you followed over the course of more than a year, I guess.
Yeah, it was actually it was a lawsuit that was filed by the Des Moines Water Works, which supplies drinking water to 500,000 central Iowans, and we are upstream in northern Iowa. And I had been on a 20-year campaign to save our lake from sedimentation. God made it 24 feet deep. We had gotten it down to 7 feet through poor soil stewardship. And soil erosion was just filling in all these prairie pothole glacial lakes all over Minnesota, South Dakota, and Iowa. And nobody wanted to talk to me about it. I couldn't get any farmers to talk about it, agronomists, the Department of Natural Resources, Iowa State University people. Nobody really wanted to talk about the fact that we were just filling in our lakes with Iowa black gold.
Which is running off of farms.
Running off of farms, right. And but I had these pictures. Our pressman and I drove all over northwest Iowa taking pictures of these lakes just so that we'd have a record that they once existed. And I took these pictures down to a meeting of the Iowa Environmental Council in 2013, and I was showing them, and this guy sitting next to me on this panel said, "We're going to sue your county." And it was Bill Stowe, who was the CEO of the Des Moines Water Works. I said, "We're going to sue us for what?" And he said, "For polluting the Raccoon River with nitrate. That is, from nitrogen fertilizer." And northern Iowa at one time was all slough and tall grass prairie, and my grandfather came in and drained a large share of it. They laid drainage tile about 3 feet underneath the ground and buried it down there about 80 feet apart. And so water leaches down and goes into this corrugated pipe, and that pipe leads to the river, and then it goes to Des Moines, where they built North America's largest nitrate removal system because we apply anhydrous ammonia to the land to grow corn, and that is nitrogen. And we also apply manure, which includes phosphorus and nitrogen. PNK, phosphorus, nitrogen, and potash. Those are the three critical ingredients for corn. And but in Iowa, we wear a suspender with our belts, so we'll put pig manure on top of anhydrous ammonia just to make sure we're going to get 200 bushels per acre out of that corn. And then about 30% of that nitrate load ends up in the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers, where it's creating a toxic stew in the Saylorville Reservoir just north of Des Moines. And they can't get rid of the cyanobacteria. Nitrate levels are about 3 times higher, at least on average, than the recommended by the University of Iowa College of Public Health. The Raccoon River's run about 14 milligrams per liter of nitrate, and the University of Iowa recommends 5 milligrams per liter. In Rock County, Minnesota, which is just over the Iowa border, it's 70 milligrams per liter. And this doesn't only lead to blue baby syndrome, but it also, we believe, leads to Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, and all sorts of neurological disorders. And every 2,000, I know 3 2,000-acre farmers who have MS, Parkinson's disease, and one of my best friends who died of Lou Gehrig's disease. All, I believe, because of their exposure to nitrate. And so the Des Moines Water Works sued Buena Vista, Sac, and Calhoun counties. These are all adjacent counties in northwest Iowa in the buckle of the Corn Belt. And over non-point, agriculture is exempted from the Clean Water Act, the 1972 Clean Water Act, because it's non-point solution. It's not a sewer pipe. It's coming from disparate places. How can you regulate one farm and not the other? So there is no regulation. Agriculture is exempted from the Clean Water Act. But the Des Moines Water Works said, well, there is this drainage tile, this corrugated pipe underground that is leading to the Raccoon River that is a point source of pollution. And so that demanded that these strange creations under Iowa law called drainage districts, which are administered by the counties, 99 counties, and the trustees of these drainage districts are the county board of supervisors or county commissioners. But the only authority they have is to improve the drainage. So the only authority they really have is to blow up beaver dens. And the Iowa Supreme Court ruled that since they had such limited authority, they couldn't be sued. And so it struck out money damages, and then a federal district court judge shortly thereafter dismissed the lawsuit because the counties lacked standing to be sued. But
along the way, they mounted a very elaborate
Right.
defense.
Right.
And
So
that's really what you focused on.
So yes. So my son Tom, he's the spear catcher, and I said, Tom, since this is a pollution lawsuit, the counties aren't going to have insurance coverage to cover their legal defense. And so why don't you go ask the Board of Supervisors who's going to cover their legal, are they going to raise taxes? Are they going to assess the drainage districts, which is assessing the farmers who have land in that drainage district? And so he went down and asked the Board of Supervisors, how are you going to pay your legal expenses? And they said, never mind, we have friends. And so Tom came back and reported that, and I said, go back and ask them who their friends are. Take another arrow. And I love sending troops into battle. And they said, are you hard of hearing? We have friends, and it's none of your business who our friends are. So the citizens of Buena Vista County, the taxpayers of Buena Vista County, were being represented essentially by unknown foreign interests. And we demanded to know who they were. And we joined with the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. It's a nonprofit group that tries to promote transparency in government, and demanded that they release their list of donors. And they refused and refused and refused. And through our own reporting, we found out who the main donors were. Guess who? Monsanto, the Koch brothers, and Farm Bureau. And so we wrote a series of editorials over a 2-year period urging A, transparency, B, mediation between agriculture and the environment, and then C, moving toward a new sort of agriculture that's sustainable. 10 of those editorials from 2016, I thought, this is kind of a David versus Goliath thing. By the way, the counties finally had to withdraw from the legal fund. I'm sorry. The counties finally had to withdraw from this legal fund because they realized they were in violation of the Iowa Open Records law, and that donors, in fact, are public records. And so they had to withdraw from the fund or release the names of the donors. So they withdrew from the fund. So we gained a Pyrrhic victory. And agribusiness, the agrochemical complex, got the lawsuit thrown out. And they spent $1.7 million of dark money doing it. But we were able to get that last 100,000 anyway out of the federal court system. But we made our point, and we got them to stand down. And then I selected 10 of these editorials and thought, maybe I could enter these. We don't enter any contests, and so for the first time I entered the Pulitzers. And I asked John if he'd give me $50. And he said, "Are you crazy? You're never going to win a Pulitzer." And I said, "Well, I've prayed to St. John Bosco, patron saint of editors and pressmen, and he's assured me that we have a good shot." And so he said, "All right," and he handed over the $50. And on April 9th of 2017, they were going to announce the Pulitzers, and so I asked my wife Dolores if she'd give me a haircut, and she said, "Why?" And this was on Sunday, and I said, "Well, on Monday they're going to announce the Pulitzer Prizes, and we're going to win it." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, St. John Bosco told me so. I'm an Irishman." And so there are, I don't know, like 22 journalism categories for the Pulitzers, and editorial writing is number 18. And at 2 p.m. on Monday, I dialed into Pulitzer.org on a live stream, and they go through the list, the New York Times investigative reporting, Wall Street Journal explanatory reporting. And number 17, Peggy Noonan from the Wall Street Journal for commentary. And I said, they're going to call my name next. And sure as hell, number 18, it said Art Cullen from the Storm Lake Times. Yeah!
You could have jinxed it with that haircut.
Yeah. And I shot through the stained ceiling tiles and said, "Holy barnyard epithet, John, we won, we won." And he said, "What did we win?" He thought we'd won a spool of fishing line or something. And I said, "Well, the freaking Pulitzers, man." And for the first time in our lives, we hugged. So, true story.
That's a heartwarming story.
Yeah.
But it's also a story that is just such a vivid reminder of what happens if you don't have this kind of local journalism.
Right.
What happens when it goes away?
Right. Well, Monsanto, they just have, well, I guess they're having their way anyway.
Yeah.
But
there's a check.
But there's a check, and the conversation changed in Iowa because of it.
How so?
Well, because of severe weather in the last 3 years since that lawsuit, extreme rains that prevented planting and harvesting, everybody realizes that the reason we need more and more of these drainage tiles in northern Iowa so we can flood Cedar Rapids, give them 500-year floods every 5 years, is because of increased precipitation in the upper Midwest, 5% per decade, increased absolute humidity. And these torrential rains are coming down. We can't go, so we've got to get rid of the water somehow. We just keep expanding this drainage system, and everybody realized this can't go on. And now the conversation is changing about how can we clean up our surface water and how can agriculture actually lead the way out of climate change, or the climate crisis, I should say, and it can. But that's a whole nother...
Yeah, I want to get to that too, but at least when I was last in Iowa doing reporting, which now goes back several years, you couldn't talk to farmers about climate change.
Right.
It just was not a topic. You could talk about extreme weather a little
Exactly.
bit. But has that changed? I mean, is there an open conversation about climate change and the
Oh,
role
yeah,
of
and
agriculture?
Yes, people. It used to be there's a group called the Practical Farmers of Iowa, who promote what we call sustainable agriculture, and then there's something that goes beyond that that's called regenerative agriculture, and they're active in both those fields, as it were.
Will you give us a quick definition of regenerative agriculture for people who haven't heard the term?
Well, the idea is to restore soil health through more diverse planting and grazing activities rather than relying on this monoculture of corn and soybeans planted in an oil base. And so you'll plant, in a 7-year rotation, you'll plant rye, succotash, alfalfa, corn, soybeans, and then graze it, in grass. So, and you can eliminate chemical usage and eliminate fertilizers to a great degree by using livestock and manure, and by recreating the microbial life in the soil. You don't need this. It creates. You don't need the same levels of nitrogen fertilizer that we're using. And so there's been a whole lot of research done at Iowa State University, which is a great land-grant school, and that shows, for example, by planting 10% of a field in native prairie, you can eliminate 90% of nitrate runoff into the. And so farmers are paying attention to these things, and they don't want to lose 30% of their nitrogen loads. And they're realizing that this is costing them way too much money, and especially now with these huge flushes that we're getting with climate change, the conversation is moving to how can we hold this water in place? How can I hold my fields in place? Tens of thousands of acres in southwest Iowa are washed out, never to be farmed in my lifetime, or even a younger person's lifetime. And so everybody's getting it because the pace is picking up so fast. And you guys in California know when California and Australia are burning down and it doesn't stop raining in Iowa, something's wrong. We got to change. Yeah. And it is changing.
So you convened a farm summit for the presidential candidates, right? You organized that. And I don't know how many came.
5.
5 of them came. And I'm kind of curious to what kind of ideas did they bring with them? I mean, this is the one time of the year where you get national politicians talking about farm policy,
right?
Agricultural policy, and it's one opportunity for journalists to extract this from them and get them to think about it. What did you hear there, and what was exciting?
Well, yeah, we co-sponsor with the Iowa Farmers Union and Huffington Post what was called the Heartland Rural Forum in Storm Lake, and we had Elizabeth Warren, John Delaney, Amy Klobuchar, Julian Castro, and who am I? There's one other. Well, anyway.
Bernie Sanders there?
No, but senior moment. Tim Ryan. Okay. Tim Ryan, who was he really does get it. He really understands organic ag and regenerative ag. But anyway, what impressed me most was that was the audience of farmers union members who were. They're in a crisis right now in the Midwest. Suicide rates are at their highest level since 1985, in the height of the farm crisis, which drove a whole generation of farmers out of business. Wisconsin dairy farmers are drowning in a sea of milk. And Elizabeth Warren, I got to say, came in there with her Rosie the Riveter routine. Talking antitrust and regenerative ag and wanting to increase the size of the Conservation Stewardship Program, which promotes conservation on working lands, 15-fold. 15-fold. That's $45 billion. this is real, you know, they were talking on stage about carbon sequestration in the soil and about paying farmers for environmental services and making agriculture, rather than a leading contributor to the climate crisis, to make it the tip of the spear in the battle against global warming. And that was impressive.
And did that resonate with the farmers in the room?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And they were talking about a farmer's bill of rights, and breaking up Monsanto. And again, I've never heard a farmer say, I sure love consolidated seed and chemical companies. So it's a whole different conversation than we've been hearing since Earl Butz, the agriculture secretary in 1972, said plant fence row to fence row so we can feed the world. What he really meant was so we can get Monsanto into China.
Mm-hmm. That's what he did. So, turning to politics, a little further. It seems remarkable today that Barack Obama won Iowa twice, as well as the Iowa Caucuses in his first election. And then last time around, Donald Trump won by 10%, nearly 10%. What happened between those two elections? Did the Democrats do things to lose the farm vote?
Or the rural vote?
Or the rural vote?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Hillary Clinton never showed up. And that's the first rule of politics, is to ask them for their vote. She never asked the Midwest for her vote. And second, we were flipping the bird at the country. That's why Steve King gets elected. That's why Donald Trump gets elected. They're saying, all right, screw you people. You've been flying over us and dumping on us. We've been in decline for 50 years now, and nobody cares if Waterloo, Iowa slides off the map and John Deere shuts down. And that explains a lot of it. And there is a lot of angst in the Midwest about declining manufacturing wages, half of what they were in real terms in 1975. And Barack Obama came along and said, hope and change. Where was it?
Mm-hmm.
There was no change.
He also made...
He saved the economy. He was a little preoccupied with the 2008 crash. But materially, while Wall Street got bailed out and the insurance companies got bailed out, nobody bailed out Milwaukee or Flint. And then Hillary just didn't show up. And Bernie Sanders is showing up, and he's talking, he's bringing in Michael Moore with his Detroit Tigers cap. And
is that the right cap to wear in Iowa?
I'd prefer a Minnesota Twins cap, but we have no professional team other than the Iowa Hawkeyes. But Bernie is actually talking about a political revolution going beyond hope and change, which is what Donald Trump was talking about, was a political revolution of draining the swamp, and we're going to bring those jobs back from Mexico and China. Yeah, right. And but we suckered for it because we were desperate. But
how's that worked out? I mean, do people feel like Trump has...
Well, so he started a trade war with China, which immediately caused layoffs at John Deere, the largest employer in Iowa. They make tractors. And Harley Davidson, he started a trade war with Europe that really hurt Harley Davidson in Milwaukee. And then he started a trade war with China that shaved soybean prices by 30%. And so then he had to bail out. They have these so-called trade adjustment packages for farmers that are bigger than the bailout of Detroit. Still, farmers are blowing their brains out and hanging themselves in barns. Even with that size of bailout, $23 billion a year for 2 years, they're still losing money. They've lost money 7 years in a row. And they're fed up. And for the life of me, I'll eat your left shoe if Iowa wins or goes to Trump again. I just cannot
You really
imagine.
don't think it will happen?
I cannot imagine how when the dairy industry is imploding in Wisconsin and Harley Davidson's laying people off and Snap-on Tools ain't selling any tools out of Sheboygan. How's Trump going to win that? This is the land of La Follette. Wisconsin. How's he going to win Michigan? How's he going to win Flint? I just don't. Will African American voters sit on their hands in Flint like they did with Hillary? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of anger, and. You know, the bicoastal economies, it looks pretty good, you know, but you get between Colorado and Pennsylvania, and it's not very good. Real wages are going down. You know, like I say, farmers are losing money at rates they haven't seen since the farm crisis. And California's on fire, and I think people are I think it was an aberration. I'd like to think.
I would too. So, like it or not, you're not only now a newspaper man, but a power broker in national politics. And although the circulation of the Storm Lake Times is south of 3,000,
Yeah.
candidates for president now have to come and kiss your ring. Well, I don't see a ring.
Yeah.
Another part of you.
Yeah. Right. Not much of that either.
Now, I don't think there's anyone in this room who can get Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden on the phone. So what is that like? You interviewed 15 of the candidates.
Yeah.
Three of them showed up in Storm Lake last weekend.
Right.
Yeah,
We had Andrew Yang, Bernie Sanders, and Pete Buttigieg.
So how do you make use of that incredible opportunity that so few of us have?
Well, this time, of course, last time nobody came, except for Martin O'Malley, and he played a fine guitar. But this time, what I did is I buttonholed every one of those candidates on a plan for regenerative agriculture, that is, to lead the way out of this climate crisis. And every single one of them, led by Warren, came up with really substantial plans that Beto O'Rourke had gone to school on it. Pete Buttigieg has a very exhaustive regenerative ag plan and conservation plan.
Do they all revolve around paying farmers for ecosystem
Environmental services, right.
Uh-huh.
So for
and
capturing,
shifting out of commodity subsidies to
yes.
that?
So we shift from, Tom Harkin wrote, former senator from Iowa, wrote the Conservation Stewardship Program to replace crop insurance in the system of subsidies that we've had, saying that this is going to be the future of food subsidy in the United States is conservation funding. And so we're seeing a shift. Even Joe Biden is talking about tripling the size of the Conservation Stewardship Program, whereas Warren's talking about expanding it by 15-fold. And we can, by changing the land use in the United States, and we can actually mute the entire effect of the transportation system in the vehicle system in the United States. We can suck that much carbon out of the air if we plant grass and rye and succotash and let cattle roam the green hills. we can solve this problem, you know, that we can remove 10 to 15% of the carbon from the atmosphere just by, changing land use patterns. So farmers can actually make money, so they aren't indentured slaves to Monsanto.
How do they make money under this?
Well,
they're going to. There's
no chemical costs, you know, no 20% premium to plant Roundup-ready soybeans, Roundup-resistant soybeans, or dicamba-resistant soybeans. So now, even if you don't want to use Roundup or dicamba, which are herbicides, you have to buy the herbicide-resistant soybeans from Monsanto because your neighbors are all spraying that stuff. And so to protect your soybeans, you have to make them dicamba-resistant. They're all fed up with it. They're not buying these dicamba-resistant beans anymore. They're not buying BT corn, which is genetically modified to resist corn rootworms, because they can't afford it. And so they're finding that through regenerative agriculture, they're making $1,000 where a farmer's losing $1,000 under the current system because they have no chemical costs, they have the same yields, they suffer no yield loss, and they're getting, rather than getting paid $3.50 a bushel for conventional chemically raised corn, you can get paid 3 times as much for organic corn, at $10 to $13 a bushel, as opposed to $3.50 to $4 a bushel. So they're, you may think farmers are stupid, but they're not that stupid. And General Mills now is shifting all their contracted wheat acreage in the Dakotas to organic. And Kellogg just announced this week that they are eliminating the use of glyphosate on that's Roundup, on any of their contracted acres.
So you think we're really at an inflection point?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We can fix this. We can solve this problem.
That's the most encouraging news I've heard about agriculture from Iowa in a very long time. So I want to turn, in the last few minutes we have, and I'll be turning to you for questions soon, and students first. I'd love to recognize them first. So we keep hearing that the Iowa caucus voter is a very pragmatic creature. That's the story that reaches to us, and that electability is their first consideration when they're looking at this Democratic field because of the importance they feel of defeating Trump. And yet the latest polls all show that Iowa's feeling the burn.
Right.
Is that a paradox? To me, he seems like has electability problems nationally.
Well, I thought Trump had electability problems.
Touche.
So I don't know. All I know is when I was at a rally Sunday for Bernie, and I saw guys in Pioneer seed corn caps there that are 60 years old that you never thought would be anywhere near a democratic socialist. And there's some Smiths.
These are Trump voters.
These are not necessarily Trump voters, but they might have voted for Trump.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They are certainly not. They don't wear Birkenstocks. And there was young people there, and people of color were there, and Latinos are so scared of being deported. Even citizens who are registered to vote just don't show up to see these candidates. They just don't show up in public, period, because they're so afraid. And when you live under Steve King's reign of terror, you just don't show up. And Julian Castro confirms it. He says they aren't showing up anywhere he goes.
So they won't show up at the caucus either?
No, they won't show up. Probably won't show up at the caucuses.
Yeah.
And also, the caucuses are not something that Latinos would be accustomed to. It's kind of a curious creation. It's designed to be a party-building exercise, and Latinos aren't necessarily ones to shove their way around in a room.
Well, it's a very public event.
Yeah.
Everybody is moving to. You don't just vote, right? Explain how it works.
Yeah. So It's a delegate selection process. It's not really a primary. And so you go in and you have to have, each campaign needs to have 15% support in that precinct. And there's four precincts in Storm Lake. And so we'll go to a church or a fire station, and you'll be sitting with your neighbors, and I'm sitting in one camp, and Michael's sitting in another camp, and you have to have 15% support to be viable. And
so you vote, you vote by going to the corner.
Yeah, you go to a corner and you go sit under the Bernie flag.
So everybody knows who you voted for.
Yeah, so you're for Bernie over here, and you're for Mayor Pete over here, and you're for Warren over here. And then Yang doesn't have 15%, so then the Bernie people go over and say, we'll give you a delegate to the state convention if you'll come over. And then they go to the uncommitteds and say, you give us half of your uncommitteds at 30%, and you'll still have a viable uncommitted delegation for the state convention where you'll get wined and dined as an uncommitted. And then at the national convention where you'll get wined and dined as an uncommitted. So this is all part of a political process that very few people outside of Iowa understand, but it's all about party building and getting people involved in the county conventions, the district conventions, and state conventions. So you start trading votes, trading support. You come with us, you can break loose if you got 15% at the district convention. You can break loose and go back to Yang. And so all these deals are made. And it's really fascinating.
So your second choice is very important.
Second choice is very important. And Warren, in the Iowa poll conducted by the Des Moines Register, leads in second choice. So when you see the polls, Bernie had the lead in the last Iowa poll, but nobody pays attention, or very few people pay attention to that second choice. And so there about half of that caucus in all over the state is going to be undecided on Monday night. And because either their group isn't viable or they went in uncommitted. And it seems like they'll break down evenly rather than falling in one direction, like saying falling to Bernie. Everybody assumes that Bernie has some ceiling in Iowa because those Biden people just couldn't bring themselves to go with Bernie. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it shakes out Monday night. Elizabeth Warren has by far the best organization in the state, although Bernie seems to be turning them out. And Pete Buttigieg has reputedly he's worked the rural areas really hard, and he has almost as big a campaign organization as Warren. And
will you tell us who you endorsed and what you think is going to happen?
Yeah, so on December 11th, we endorsed Warren. So now our TV ad that is airing in Iowa now says endorsed by the New York Times and the Storm Lake Times.
Nice.
Yeah. So I'm a big shot, see? And I've arrived.
At least you made up your mind, unlike the
right. Right. And we picked her because, again, she really led the way in the discussion of agriculture, rural affairs, antitrust, and as I told the Boston Globe, you can look out for Boston, we got to look out for Storm Lake. And when it comes to rural America, there is no candidate who is her rival, in my opinion. She calls herself Betsy from Oklahoma, and there's more Oklahoma in her than there is Harvard, I'd say.
That's a lucky thing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's turn to the audience and wait for a microphone. Julie, see that hand up there in the red shirt? Thank you.
Thanks for your reporting and everything. So I haven't heard a lot about regenerative farming from the Midwest and from the central part of America until actually last week when I heard about a farm called Coyote Run in Lacona, Iowa, run by a farmer named, I think, Matt Russell.
Matt Russell, right.
Yeah, and he brought Biden, O'Rourke, Kamala Harris, and it sounds like people are coming to,
There's a loose conspiracy going on.
Exactly, and I haven't heard about this. In fact, 10 years ago when I read Omnivore's Dilemma, I just kept
He wrote that,
yes, exactly. I just kept reading about how, we're just locked by Monsanto and oil getting into our soil and everything. My question is, how much percentage-wise do you think farmers are coming on to this whole idea of regenerative farming in Iowa and in, these states?
Yeah, as usual, one of my thoughts trailed off. I was talking about the practical farmers. 30 years ago, they were considered freaks, and they would get 20 people at their annual field days. Now they're getting 1,000 people at their field days, and I've seen crowds of 150 in northwest Iowa in Steve King's backyard. And again, these are guys with their backs up against the wall, and they're looking for anything they can do to cut costs and stay alive. And they're showing up at these field days interested in winter rye and holding nitrogen in place. And
You mean through cover crops?
through planting cover crops so it's changing rapidly because of cost structures and extreme weather, and I think that most farmers, I would say, in fact, a Rural Life poll showed that 60% of Iowa farmers would do more conservation practices if their landlord would let them. The problem is the people living in California who own all that Iowa farmland, they like those checks.
Why would they be against conservation practices?
Because they don't understand. They think that if you spray it with Roundup and plant corn, automatically you make money. And it's a lot. And you cannot tell that widow that, hey, we're going organic on your farm, or go in and try and tell the banker that. Well, now the bankers are starting to get up on it. Now, finally, Iowa State University is even the Extension Service is now preaching it. And although the Iowa legislature did eliminate funding for the Aldo Leopold's Center for Sustainable Agriculture at Iowa State, the first sustainable ag center in the country, and they eliminated the funding for it just because of the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit, just out of spite.
So the Farm Bureau, which is not identical with farmers' interests, as you know, but a lot of people on the coast assume when they hear Farm Bureau, that's farmers talking.
It's an insurance company.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, to get their insurance policy, you have to join.
Right.
And they tend to represent the interests of agribusiness more
Right.
than farmers. But nevertheless, they're still fighting a lot of these changes that you're talking about,
Right.
yes?
They are, but even the Farm Bureau at one time was advocating the idea of carbon sequestration and paying farmers for environmental services. It's pretty hard to say to a Farm Bureau member, would you like a check for $300 an acre? That's $100 more than you'd make anyway, just to do nothing but plant grass. I think every farmer would say, I'll take that check. And so I think in answer to your question, most farmers want to do the right thing if they only could, but they're locked into this ag supply chain. And the bankers are in there, the landlords are in there, Monsanto's in there, Farm Bureau, all the farm publications. You got to have 200 bushel corn. The only way to get there is with Roundup and nitrogen and hydrous ammonia, which is a byproduct of petroleum, the petroleum industry. So most farmers want to do the right thing, and they're miscast as these enemies of sound stewardship. but the fact is that they don't own the land. You know,
Do you think that most farmers know what the right? Do you think that most farmers know what the right thing is now? Like,
no, but they're getting there real fast.
yeah.
And this campaign has sharpened the focus. But what's really sharpened the focus is this extreme weather, and when you can't harvest or plant your corn, it gets your attention real quickly, and they realize we've got to do something different, and we've got to be able to hold the soil. They're starting to realize now, because they're valuing land now in a different way, that because of its depletion, its soil depletion. And so it's actually showing up in land values now. Wheat yields are declining 5% a year in China because of soil degradation. And protein content in Iowa corn tests is showing steady declines because of soil degradation. And everybody's getting onto that. Everybody's starting to learn about it now.
Sorry, one last follow-up.
No, I think we got to move to somebody else. Thank you.
Carbon sequestration of soil. Do they know about that?
Yes.
Do we have another question? Yeah, in the back there.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
Can you talk a little bit about the work to create a moratorium on large animal farms that's happening in Iowa right now? There's a moratorium they're working on.
They've been talking about moratoriums on hog confinement buildings in Iowa since Heck was a pup. And it's not going to happen. And nothing is more sacred in Iowa than a confined hog. And it's just not going to happen. What is going to happen is, I'm convinced that the entire livestock confinement system is going to fall under its own weight to disease. Because we can't use the antibiotics like we used to. And there was a avian flu virus that swept through Minnesota, South Dakota, and Iowa in 2015 that killed 5 million laying hens in Buena Vista County alone, and wiped out the turkey industry in Minnesota, completely just wiped it out. And it's going to happen again, and people who ignore the 1918 flu pandemic think it can't happen. But it did happen in 2015, and it's happening right now in China with and the African swine flu. And you just can't have that kind of density anymore and sustain it. So the moratorium, nature is going to impose the moratorium well before the legislature does.
Yes.
Quick follow-up to that. Why is there a willingness to sort of see a difference in like changing practices in growing corn and growing winter rye and all of that, but not in the livestock industry? What's the difference?
Well, the farmer doesn't own the hogs. They're owned by the Chinese and the Brazilians. And Smithfield is owned by the Chinese. They own 40% of the hogs in Iowa. And that's why. Is because the livestock system is not controlled by any producers. It's controlled by, producers on the ground. It's controlled by the Chinese, JBS out of Brazil, and Tyson. And to a lesser extent Cargill and a few other players, but that's why confinements. It's all part of the vertical integration of the livestock industry,
So the farmers are growing hogs under contract to those companies.
Yeah, so the farmer goes out and gets a loan on a building to fill it with Smithfield hogs, Chinese hogs, and who we're in a trade war with. And then he takes out a loan, and by the time that building is shot, he's paid off the loan and has nothing to show for it. But he got about 15 to 20 grand a year for managing 3 hog buildings with 1,000 hogs each. So he's in control of. He's just in control of the light switch. And so farmers aren't making those decisions about confinement. That's being made in Springdale, Arkansas, and Beijing.
But where's the local political support for sustaining that system? It doesn't seem to offer much to people in Iowa.
Well, they own the Iowa legislature. I mean, there's something called state capture that the Koch brothers dreamed up through an outfit called the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC. And they've taken over the Iowa judiciary. They unseated 3 Iowa Supreme Court justices for voting in favor of gay marriage. And that was the work of these outside interests. And they've taken over the legislature, the governorship. They did the same thing in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin started to fight back and elected Tony Evers, thank God, in the last election over Scott Walker. But they did it in Kansas. They did it in Iowa. They did it in Wisconsin. And that's how and then they take over the state university systems. Now, Monsanto is the main funder of the genetics program at Iowa State University. And it's the leading, crop genetics program in the country besides Berkeley. And so they control the whole system.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I hadn't thought too critically about the role of a newspaper's presidential endorsement until New York Times split their vote last week. And I'm wondering if you could share some insight historically, practically. Is a newspaper's presidential endorsement a public service? Could it be a disservice? And does your answer change when a paper's circulation is a couple thousand versus hundreds of thousands or millions?
Well, first of all, I question how much endorsements matter. I'd point out President Bill Bradley, who we endorsed, President George McGovern, and I don't know who. I suppose the New York Times endorsed Hillary, didn't they? We did, and although she never came.
He's still feeling that.
Yeah, I don't get over that, and but I think it's still worthwhile to do it because we do get a special seat, and I got to spend 45 minutes interviewing Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, and so it's fun to do. And I think we have an obligation to say, look, we got this front row seat, and here's what we think. And I also am old-fashioned enough to believe in institutions, and that institutions are important. And I still believe that a community newspaper or a state newspaper is an institution and has special responsibilities. And so whether it matters or not, it's important to do.
Mm. Oh, okay.
Thanks. Would you comment on the trade deal with China and whether it will...
How much time you got?
Well, on whether it will operate to be that bailout for the Midwestern farmers to enable them to continue agriculture as is because China's obligated to buy so much American produce?
Well, okay. First of all, Trump said that they were going to buy $50 billion worth of agricultural products. So you better buy bigger tractors and more land. And you know how much the soybean markets went up that day? They went down 9 cents because they think he's a liar. And they know he's a liar. and they don't, and that China's only bought 17 billion, or 20, I think maybe. Anyways, about half that much is their record year, which is 2015, I think.
And they found a new source of supply.
Yeah, now they're ripping up the rainforest, burning down the rainforest in Brazil so they can grow or graze it and then use the savannas to grow soybeans. And we've lost those markets forever. So what Earl Butz started, Donald Trump ended. Those markets aren't coming back for those export markets, and that's a big part of why farmers are paying attention to a different way of being paid for environmental services rather than banking on exports. 30% of our dollar, it comes from the export markets, and we just lose at the game every year, and we've been losing at it since 1972, and we have half as many farmers and twice as much exports. And what do we got to show for it? Nothing. And so they're saying, okay, maybe there is a different way to do this. Maybe if we got paid for environmental services rather than exports, maybe that makes more sense. And they're starting to think that way.
Okay.
Hi. Thank you for being here first.
Well, thank you.
I'm wondering if you think it's possible to attain this land change use that you've been talking about towards regenerative agriculture without changing land ownership and the business model of agriculture, and only with market incentives and policy.
Yeah, basically, if you bid $1 more for grass over corn, they'll plant grass. The landlord will. If the farm manager tells that widow lady in California that you're going to make $10 more planting grass instead of corn, and the banker says it's okay, they'll plant grass. And the bankers are figuring out that if they want to keep their assets in order, their loans, then they're going to tell these farmers to cut their chemical costs. And they're starting to have those conversations. They have about one more year before we start to get into another full-fledged farm crisis. And those conversations are going on right now with farmers about what are you going to do next year to break even. And we're probably going to have those conversations with our banker ourselves this year.
But everything depends on having a new, very different, radically different kind of farm bill, right?
That's right.
It changes. We already pay farmers an enormous amount of money.
But they're doing it now, even with the meager subsidies that they do get. They're doing it just to cut their chemical costs, because they're seeing these guys that are planting cover crops, and they're completely eliminating their use of herbicides just by planting winter cover crops like rye, and you plant it in the fall in, say, September, so it holds that soil and water in place in the winter, in the fall and winter flushes. And they're finding that by using these cover crops, they don't need to fertilize in the fall or spray herbicides in the spring, and that they can get in a lot faster because they don't have to do all that poisonous work.
Julie? Yes.
Hi, yeah, thank you again so much for being here. I'm also really curious about regenerative agriculture, and I immediately kind of wonder what that will feel like for consumers.
Healthier food. There's a book called Omnivore's Dilemma that talks about the damaging effects of feeding cattle corn in feedlots, which, by the way, are unsustainable. I've been to Dodge City, Kansas, and Garden City, Kansas, and you go into Dodge City and there's 10,000 steers laying right outside the city limits, and it smells like burnt hair and cow shit, and the Ogallala Aquifer is going dry, And they aren't going to be able to just ship in corn to Kansas anymore and feed those cattle at Dodge City. Those cattle are going to have to move north where there's water, and that's going to be Canada, Minnesota, Buffalo, New York, because the Ogallala Aquifer will be drunk dry within 20 years. That slakes the thirst of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, the entire, the Old West, and the cattle trails. And so that party's over. And it's all going to be forced on, and it's being forced on us very rapidly right now, and in ways that we don't even appreciate.
So time for one more question.
Hi. Again, thank you for being here, both of y'all. So you talked a moment ago about how you believed in the importance of local papers, and maybe there's not an answer to this question, but what's the next rabbit out of the hat in terms of keeping your paper alive?
I was asking Michael Pollan about that this afternoon.
And did I have a good answer? No.
No, he didn't. Well, what the entire industry is trying to do is to switch to reader revenue, and that is asking you to pay for a subscription. And it's working pretty well for the category killers like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they can make a fair amount of money selling a $10 subscription or a $20 subscription. We can't. We need a $100 subscription because our universe is that much smaller. And it's pretty tough getting $100 out of somebody for a newspaper, and especially when half the town can't read English, or Spanish for that matter. They come to the United States with a third-grade education and can't read in their native language. And so it's really tough in Storm Lake, and I don't know what the hell we're going to do. We're fortunate because I got lucky and won a Pulitzer. And so I have some opportunities to do stuff that my neighbors down the road don't have, like come here. And but it's an existential crisis, and I can't say that enough. We don't know. We don't know if we'll be in business after this year, honestly. And there's a lot. I have a friend in Carroll, Iowa, very similar to an hour away from Storm Lake. At one time, it had the highest household penetration of any newspaper in America. And now he doesn't know if he'll be open in a year. And we don't know what the answer. I could get a grant to go to Mexico and do a story, long-form reporting story for the Atlantic, but I can't get a grant to pay my son Tom to cover the County Board of Supervisors.
There it is. There it is. Well, let's hope you keep doing what you're doing, because it's incredibly important.
We're going to try.
Yeah. And thank you for filling us with hope, though, on some other issues besides journalism. I never thought farming would look more promising than journalism, but perhaps we've reached that point. And will you all join me in thanking Art Cullen?
Well, thank you.